Hello, everyone, and welcome back to HeirKare with Kathleen and Erik. We are estate planning and elder law attorneys working out of Johnson City, Tennessee, and Swanee, Georgia. And our topic today is going to be about long-term care and Medicaid coverage for long-term care. If you have any requests or questions for topics or things that have been brought up and you want to know a little more, please go ahead and drop a comment down below so we can make sure that we're addressing things you guys are curious about. So as we move into long-term care planning today, I know this often gets confused with another government program. So Erik, why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
When you're talking about sort of elder care, there's two sort of government programs that help pay for medical care. One is Medicare, and this is the one that you see all the Part B and supplemental plans and all this stuff getting advertised on TV and all of that. That's similar to your just kind of standard health insurance. That's for covering doctor visits and um, prescription drugs, all that kind of stuff, depending on what type of supplements and things you have. And you get that just by virtue of your age. Once you reach a certain age, you're eligible. That's it. Um, Medicaid is the other program, and they get kind of confused because they both start with the meta beginning, right? And so it's Medicare is one piece that's your health insurance. Medicaid is a separate program that each state handles it differently, but it's basically income based medical coverage. And so you can qualify for that pretty much at any time throughout your life if your income and resources come into play. And then as it relates to the elder care world, it's when we get into a situation where we need to cover nursing home expenses, Medicaid is the arm that typically comes in and pays for those types of things. And there's a whole lot of eligibility requirements and a whole bunch of boxes you have to check along the way to get that additional coverage in addition to your Medicare that's going to cover your visit to your physician. But you're also going to have, if you've got long-term sort of nursing home needs and things like that, can get very expensive very quickly, and Medicaid's going to be where you're typically turning to try to cover that if you don't have enough to cover it yourself privately. That's about the extent of what I know of that area. That is not my wheelhouse of clients to work with. And so Kathleen, I know this is your specific area of practice within our firm, and so I'll kind of turn it back to you to kind of give us a little bit more detail than my sort of 10,000-foot view of the matter.
Thanks, Erik. So, Erik's completely right. And so, just again to clarify, there's a lot of Medicaid programs specifically today. We're talking about long-term care. Some places refer to it as long-term care. Some states will call it 24/7 care. Generically, in the population, people talk about needing to be in a nursing home. So, all those words are basically talking about, or what we're going to be covering today. I want to take a moment to talk about some terms and some really general qualifications that you might hear in the public, and when you're looking into this and potentially needing to apply. So, in order to qualify for long term care Medicaid, you have to qualify two different ways. One is financially, and one is physically. The physically part is the status of your health, and your doctor is responsible for certifying that, and there's a whole bunch of forms and stuff that get filled out and get checked by the government to make sure that you qualify physically. The other part is financially, and this can get fairly complex pretty quickly, and so there's a couple different categories that they're looking at, so we're going to talk about those terms before we dig in a little deeper. So when you're looking to qualify financially, the applicant, or the Medicaid recipient, if you are doing a redetermination, has an income limit that they can have before it either disqualifies them or we have to do some planning to address excess income. And that income limit in Tennessee for this year is $2,982. We're in 2026 right now, so if this you're looking at this and it's not 2026, these numbers are no longer valid. But for today's purposes, and it still gives you an idea on how things work. So that's the income limit. Then you have a resource limit. And this is where things start getting extra confusing because not all of your assets are considered resources. Not all of your resources are countable. And so your countable resources, that's an official term, needs to, what you'll hear generally in the population, and sometimes even when you go talk to your local agencies, they'll say, well, you can only have $2,000. And that's true, but you also have excluded resources that in your mind would make you have more resources than $2,000. So those are very specific terms. Another term as we're going through this that I want you guys to know that you're going to hear is called the community spouse. So if an applicant is is married and their spouse is still living at home or just not receiving any Medicaid benefits, they are referred to as the community spouse. And there are greater planning options available when we are in a situation where there is a community spouse. So I wanted you guys to kind of have that basic information. And so we're going to mix it up a little bit today. We're going to have Erik playing the role of a client who's coming in and telling me about his situation. And then we're going to walk through a very basic plan that we would work out. Again, there's a lot of options on what could be done. So we're just going to be hitting a few of them here to give you an idea on what these things look like and what's possible. All right, so here we go. Erik, thanks for coming in today. I hear you are interested in some long-term care planning. So why don't you take a minute to tell me about yourself and what you're looking at today?
Yeah, well, I've done a little bit of research myself, and I found out that there's some I know what all kind of stuff I have, and the amount of stuff I have may be a problem. And so I'm wanting to know if I'm just kind of out on my own, or if I need to go, if there's some things I can do. So um, first thing is going to be, I'm on Social Security income. I make $3,000 a month that's coming in for that, and my wife has another few thousand a month coming in, and she may need to go into a nursing home soon. She's just been diagnosed with dementia about a year ago, and so it's gotten kind of rough um, pretty quickly. And from what I've heard, that amount of money coming in for income is going to make it so that we just can't get any kind of Medicaid help. So, from what I can tell, we just make too much.
Yeah, so income is actually easier to address than resources. The income limit when you're applying for long-term care Medicaid is $2,982. But the good news is that your income does not count towards your wife's income. So they are treated as completely separate. So since it sounds like we're looking at applying for Medicaid for your wife, she's under that. I'm going to use the generic $2,900 number. She's under that, so she would qualify. Now, if you were needing to apply and she was at home, then we would need to take some extra steps. In Tennessee, we have the option of doing something called a qualified income trust or a Miller trust. It's basically a fancy bank account with some paperwork that goes into it and some rules on what to do with that excess money. But generally speaking, income overages are fairly simple to get around. But in your particular situation right now, your wife would be able to qualify under the income limits. So why don't you tell me a little bit about your resources? Do you guys own a home?
Yeah, we have our house completely paid off, and I think it's probably one down the street just sold for about 300,000. Basically the same house that we have, so probably about that same price. What else do you need to know?
What about retirement accounts? Do you either one of you have any retirement accounts?
Yeah, I've got an IRA that's 70,000 or so,
And is
you know,
that your
depending on the
IRA
market.
or always depending on the market? Is that IRA in your name or in your wife's name?
It's just in mine.
And what about any other investment, stocks, bonds, mutual funds, anything like that?
Yeah, so we also have a investment account that's about $250,000 that's held we hold together. It's in both of our names.
Right. And then tell me about vehicles. Do you guys have daily drivers? You got Maserati sitting out there? What's your vehicle situation?
No, no Maseratis, but we do each have a car.
Any other cash stashed away in the house, gold bullion, silver bars, anywhere?
No, no gold or anything like that, but we do have some cash in the safe and then some money just in our checking account, probably about 50K or so in between all of that.
So the good news is that your largest resource, which is your house, so long as you are staying at home, um, is excluded from being counted as a countable resource. And even if you were not living at home, if your wife was intending to return home, even if that intent was not feasible, it's not going to prevent her from being able to qualify for Medicaid. So the house, at least for qualifying purposes, is not going to be a hindrance. Now, we do have some significant other resources in Tennessee, and this is not the case in all states, but your retirement account is considered a countable asset. And some people say, well, that's my retirement account. That's not something where I can just pull the money out without penalties. The Medicaid doesn't care in this situation. It's considered available to both of you completely. Same thing with your joint investment accounts. And I would say, even though that retirement account is in just your name, right? Any resource from either one of you is considered available to both of you. Same thing with the investment account. The good news on the cars is that you guys each get one vehicle and it is exempt from being a countable resource. Your bank account also counts against your $2,000, right? So we are looking at a total of approximately $370,000. Now, when you have a situation like yours where you're going to still be living at home, there's something called the Community Spouse Resource Allowance. And basically, that is the recognition by the government that if we have somebody still living in the house, they still need some money to live off of and to pay for those expenses. And so they say, hey, you can take half of those countable resources and keep them in your name. Now, there's a process that's a little complex in Tennessee behind this, but just for simplified purposes here, um, we'll just talk about what those numbers would be, even though we would have to submit this to Medicaid in order to get them to give us the number, and then we'll make adjustments as necessary. But because you've got 370,000, when you divide that by two, half of that would be 185,000. And Medicaid does not let you keep just half of whatever the number is, right? There's a cap. And the cap for this year is approximately $162,000. So we've got $162,000 that you will be able to keep in cash just as your community spouse resource allowance. If you had less money, for example, and let's say your total countable resources were $40,000, well, half of that is $20,000. There's also a minimum they'll let you keep. So in that situation, you could keep $30,000, which would be more than half, but that's the minimum. And then there's also a maximum. So we want to try and make sure that whatever we do, we allow you to keep that maximum number available to you in a fairly liquid form.
Okay, so I get to keep 162,000.
Mhm.
What about the rest of it? Sounds like we still have a problem that we have too much
Yeah.
other stuff.
So yes, so that's leaving us, we'll say roughly $200,000. So there's some things we can do to spend down those resources, right? We want to make sure first that the house that you're in is in good condition and you can stay there long term without problem. So if you don't have a zero entry shower, I would suggest taking some money and investing in that. If you think you might benefit from having a wheelchair ramp put in or something like that for yourself, we can go ahead and do those upgrades. If you need a new roof, make sure the roof is good. HVAC system, is the carpet horrible, old, and you're starting to trip over it, right? Those are things that are likely to increase your risk of you personally needing long-term care in addition to your wife. So we want to make some updates to the house. I don't know the condition of your house. Maybe you've already done all these things, but if not, we can talk about that and include that money into our plan. Um, and then if there's additional money, your house is already in great shape. We can also buy a Medicaid compliant annuity for you. And what that does is it would take your resources, a chunk of the resources, we would figure that exact amount out, and we would use that money to purchase a Medicaid compliant annuity. And then that money would get paid, we would have it payable to you. So in this situation, we are converting your resource into income. And remember, Medicaid does not care, Eric, about your income. They only care about your wife's income. So again, this is involving selling stocks and things of that nature. But it is definitely something that we can do to shift the numbers around and get your wife qualified. Um, and again, different states are going to address this differently, but generally speaking, the snapshot for the community spouse maintenance allowance is done one time. So they're going to look at the joint resources at one time. What we'll do is we will then do an application, disclose all the information. They will come back and they will give us that $162,000 number. And then we go ahead and do spend down, buy an annuity. There are other options as well. You know, if you've got a really old beater car, hey, let's get you a car that's going to work better for you, right? Is it a vehicle that, you know, you can get your wife in and out of at the nursing home, or if she's going to be in a wheelchair? We want to make sure that you have a vehicle you can move her around in if that's something that you're interested in doing. So there's other ways too that we can use those assets in a way that are going to be valuable to you and not count against you or prevent your wife from qualifying for Medicaid. So those are the biggest things I see in your particular situation that we can do. Do you have any questions about any of that?
Yeah, so that all sounds great for planning for getting my wife qualified, so we'll be able to pay for that. So that's a big load off. Um, are there any things I can do with that? The part I get to keep? Is there anything I can do to plan ahead so that I don't have to do all this extra stuff whenever I need to go into a nursing facility?
Absolutely. So, you know, we want to look at what your goals and priorities are, and what you're trying to do. So, if you're really interested in preserving your house for your children, for example, um, after we've got your wife qualified, we have unlimited transfers between spouses. So that's how we can shift a lot of the assets over to you after that community spouse resource allowance snapshot. And then we can use those assets. We can either do gifting or we could fund an irrevocable trust that complies with Medicaid rules. And if you don't need services yourself for up to 5 years, the assets in there will be sheltered. Now, if you ended up needing long term care services before that and needing to apply yourself, then we would be looking at something called a penalty. So if you've done any gifting, you've just given away assets within 5 years of applying for long term care, you're going to get issued a penalty. And in very rough numbers, let's say you gave away $85,000 and the monthly divisor is $8,500 for Medicaid. They're going to say, hey, you're approved, but basically for 10 months, we're not going to pay. So we want to make sure that if we do that kind of gifting or trust planning, that we're reasonably confident you're not going to need long term care in the next 5 years, or that you have sufficient assets to help pay, or your family also has sufficient assets. Maybe people outside of you and your wife have sufficient assets to pay until we get to that 5 year mark so that we don't trigger a penalty. And in rare
So I shouldn't
occasions,
just put all my kids' names on the deed and transfer the house to them.
I would not recommend doing that. There's a couple reasons
Okay.
for that. Um, Number one, as a lawyer, I'm very risk averse. Your home is your largest asset. And if you go ahead and transfer that to your children, unfortunately, we have seen situations where children then are the legal owners and they want to claim their rights and uh, have created difficult situations for their parents, including the parents losing the home. And even when your adult children are cooperative and wanting to do the right thing, if they were to have a lot of debt from an accident or medical debt or something, that house is now one of their assets. And so it would be subject to their creditors. This is something people do not infrequently. It's not ever my first recommendation for people because of those risks. And the difference with the trust, if you put it in an irrevocable trust, then you have rights and it is protected during your life. And so we can be very certain that you are not going to lose your home during your life. And then the house can go to the children or charity or whatever you wanted after you pass away. So there's definitely a lot more options for planning when we are doing advanced planning, particularly if we think we're going to have 5 years or we've got funds to pay for a while to get us through to 5 years.
So what I hear you telling me is I probably should have come and done this all 5 years ago before my wife got diagnosed with stuff.
It's we always have more options when we have more runway, but I don't want you to think that just because we have less time means you don't have options. So we almost always have got good options on how to preserve assets. Oftentimes, when we are doing, in your situation, we call this emergency planning, meaning, hey, we think we need care or we know we need care now, or maybe they're already in a long-term care facility and we're trying to get coverage for care that's already being provided. Sometimes what the plans do is they slow the drip of resources, right? So if you're in an emergency situation, sometimes we are slowing the bleed and not completely protecting resources. But if we've got a longer runway, in most, in Tennessee and most places, we can definitely protect a greater amount of the estate, potentially all of it. Sometimes that also depends on how much control you would be willing to give up of your resources because it does involve significant retitling and restructuring of assets.
So you're telling me that the nursing home is not going to take my house away from me.
So,
That's
in this
that's what I'm really
situation,
worried about. So
yeah, I get this question a lot. Is the nursing home going to take my house? So, let's talk about how that can happen. And this again in Tennessee, how it works. So, let's say that you generally qualify, but you didn't do any protection for the house. It's in both of your names, right? And so let's say she uses $100,000 worth of services before she passes away and you survive her. That Medicaid lien is going to go away because you're the 100% owner. It's not going to attach to your ownership. It only would only attach if she was alive. And so there's no Medicaid lien there. There's not going to be any value from the house going to Medicaid because Medicaid doesn't come in and take the house. The nursing home doesn't come in and take the house. They have a lien, right? Essentially, they say, hey, you owe me money for the services that I gave you, and we want to be repaid. So that's where that comes from. It's never they're just going to take the house. Sometimes, depending on the value of the house and how long care was provided, it may be the entire value of the house, but oftentimes that's not the case. So, in a situation where you survive your spouse and you never need long term care, you don't have to worry about it. If, God forbid, your wife is in long term care and you walk out the door after we do the planning and you get hit by a bus and you're no longer with us. Well, then when your wife passes away, that house is going to be considered one of her resources and that lien would attach. So, and again, if we use $100,000 and you said your house was worth 300,000, let's just assume it's worth the same amount. That means there'd be about $200,000, assuming you don't have other debts, to go and be split between the children. All right, so that was just a little example of how long-term care planning consultations go. This is a very abbreviated version because these consults tend to take an hour and a half to 2 hours and go into a lot of different planning options. And I'll just throw some other options out there. There's personal services contracts, there's annuities, there's trust planning, there's gifting strategies, spend down options. There's a lot of different spend down options that we look at. And depending on the nature of your beneficiaries, if you have a disabled beneficiary, we have a whole host of additional planning options for long term care. So this is very, very fact specific. This is a very complex area of the law. It's a federal funded program, but again, administered by the states. Some states do the application review at a county level, some do it at the state level, and unfortunately, oftentimes it depends on who gets that application when you're doing more advanced planning on how well they're going to understand it and how much work we're going to have to do to explain it to them. Some states are really great to work with. in my experience, Tennessee is a slower moving state where we need to do some extra explaining. But that's not the case in all states. Some places have got a really good system down, and things can go through more quickly and smoothly. So I think we've touched on a very complex topic. Eric, was there anything you wanted to add or anything else we need to talk about?
Oh, and I actually learned some things that I didn't even know. So, because I don't touch on this very often, usually people call the office wanting this kind of stuff. I'm like, you should talk to Kathleen.
Yes. That's why it's great that we have each other because I could call you for all the business things and you could call me for long-term care. All right.
Absolutely.
Well, we hope that you found this information helpful. Again, if you are looking at bad diagnosis, if you are looking at a strong family history of dementia or Parkinson's or some other debilitating illness where you are very likely to end up needing long-term care, highly, highly, highly recommend that you go talk to not just an estate planning attorney, but someone who does elder law and works specifically with long-term care and Medicaid because they'll be able to explain your options to you in a way that just general estate planning is not designed to address. So definitely go talk to somebody, even if somebody's already in the nursing home. 9 times out of 10, there's still something that can be done to help you get qualified sooner rather than later. All right. And again, any questions, comments, ideas for topics, drop them in the comments below. Thank you guys so much for being with us today. And remember, as always, our CYA disclaimer, this is just legal information and it is not advice. Enjoy the rest of your day.